All right, hi everyone. This is going to be the last episode of the pilot season. So yeah, I have a good kind of grand finale here. I have a chat with Justin, co-host of the prolific Library Punk podcast. If you haven't checked it out, I would go check it out. It's the Library Punk podcast. And he's also the executive director of the prestigious library at JDFI, the John D. Fucksmith Institute. So yeah, it was a great chat to end on. We covered everything from the often eclectic path to becoming a librarian, to getting a really good detailed shakedown of some of the most important recent policy evolutions like Plan S and a few other things. So in terms of the podcast, this podcast, What Library Podcast. So this will be the last episode in this sort of pilot season, and I'm probably going to take a little bit of a pause, and just to kind of sit with it and see if it's worth continuing or not. If you are listening to this and you enjoyed the episodes and the conversations, give a follow or a like or whatever, or get in touch with me, and let me know. Just trying to see if it's worth continuing or not, or if this is kind of a good first sort of experiment. But so I had a lot of fun doing this pilot, and I'll likely be back in some form, and I'll keep you guys updated. Okay, so before we get to the conversation, this episode is sponsored by Justin's very own John D. Fucksmith Institute, which is a world-renowned institute with some of the shiniest and tallest buildings in the world. Decades ago, Mr. Fucksmith had a vision of his name on a tall, prestigious building reaching into the sky. He didn't know how or when, but a glorious institute would be named after him. For legal reasons, we must note that Mr. Fucksmith did not help build or start the Fucksmith Institute in any way, but rather was just the primary funder and public provocateur in its early days. Through much fuckery and fanfare, the John D. Fucksmith Institute was built, and to this day is a shining homage to Mr. Fucksmith's vision. An incredible fucking legacy. Okay, and now, without further ado, my conversation with Justin.
Mine's aren't working, so yeah, okay.
2, 1, recording.
Yep, I'm seeing yours go through. That's so weird. It's like yours is going at a different speed.
In what sense?
Like I can see the waveform.
Oh yeah.
So it shows like yours is like constantly streaming, and mine's like filling a bar, which is what it normally does.
Is it because
That's
I talk
so
really
weird.
fast?
I don't know. It must just be the app. I don't know. It's strange.
Oh, if it's looking weird, I can try to go through the browser.
No, it should be fine.
Okay. All right. Cool. Yeah, it sounds like I need to check out. Zencaster. It seems pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's a lot easier because all we have to do is get people a link and they can get in. All they need is a browser. They don't have to install anything, and it also has like a little bit of like post-production, so I can just run it through and it'll auto level, because sometimes people are really quiet and they don't really know how to fix their mic, so it just like levels it, and that way, since everything's leveled, I can go through and edit out background noise easier once everything is leveled.
Do you do what do you do for so you do Zencaster, and then do you do like GarageBand or something, or what do you use for your post-processing?
Yeah, I'll just run it through Zencaster first to auto level. That'll spit out individual files. I put those into Audacity for manual cuts. So if there's like the beginning like this, I'll cut. Or if there's something I have to cut out, something someone mentioned.
Yeah.
And sometimes like filler words, sometimes it doesn't always get it. Then I export those and put them into Alphonic, which is automatic post-production. That gets rid of the rest of the background noise. It cuts filler words automatically, and it gives us our transcript.
Oh, nice. So it cuts out and all that kind of stuff?
Sometimes. It doesn't always. It depends. Like if you have a really long it might leave it in for some reason. I don't know.
All right. Well, I will have to pay you a consulting fee for upgrading podcast technical stack at another time. Yeah, I had to. I was interviewing Ashley Farley from Gates Foundation, and we were talking about a policy that she hadn't released yet. So she asked me to go back and basically like cut it or like bleep it, and so I was like, that's like the most editing I've had to do. Otherwise, I just post the whole conversation like in its entirety.
Yeah.
Good and bad.
Most podcasts do. I mean, everyone has their own thing. I don't think I've seen two people who edit their podcast the same way. I've seen a bunch of people edit,
Yeah,
and everyone does it different.
yeah, yeah. Like you have like the New York Times Daily, where it's so hyper curated and so processed, and then you have like Joe Rogan, where it's just like 3 hours of whatever they ended up talking about. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, cool. Well, yeah. Thanks for agreeing to do the interview. I'm down to kind of get into it a little bit. It was really fun looking through the corpus of work you guys have done on your podcast. I didn't get a chance to listen through all of it, but it's whew, yeah. How long have you guys been doing it for?
4 years, about 2 weeks ago.
Okay, and you do. I mean, you have so many episodes, so you must do like, well, like one a week, or what's your guys' pacing?
Yeah, we
Not
try and
one a
do one a
week.
week, but yeah, we try and do one a week.
Okay.
But usually it's like, oh, we can't do it this week. So then it doesn't average out to one a week. We don't like try and make up for missed episodes.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes we have done multiple episodes in a week just because of scheduling. So, if we have someone in the UK, they'll be, we usually will do like a Saturday at like 2 p.m. Eastern. That would be like, late for them, but middle of the
Yeah.
day. It's also hard for us because we're spread across all four time zones in the US. So we have Eastern time and Pacific time
Yeah.
hosts. So
Yeah. Yeah, the worst is well, the absolute worst is anybody from Australia, but even like
mm,
Germany, and as you get kind of east from there, it gets tough. Especially because I have young kids, so doing like 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. tends to work well for them because it's before dinner time. But it's just a complete and utter shit show in the house around then. So um, cool. So yeah, I'd love to kind of start from the beginning. When you were 5 years old at the library. No, I'm just kidding. We don't have to go back that far. But like, what? Just tell me a little bit about like maybe starting in like undergrad, and kind of like what brought you into the world of libraries, and then we can kind of jam on kind of more current stuff. But yeah, I love hearing what brought people into this space and kind of what makes them tick, because it's just such a diverse group, not just library, but just more broadly scholarly communication, right? It's like you have technologists, you have people who have formal training in this, you have researchers who just got really like me, who just got really passionate about this stuff and kind of did a left turn into it. So yeah, anyways, yeah, I'd love to hear the story of Justin, kind of maybe starting in undergrad.
yeah, I think most people in any kind of library job kind of end up there accidentally. Like there's a whole series of books called like the accidental blank librarian. So
Yeah,
accidental health sciences librarian, accidental cataloging librarian. So I
yeah,
mean, people end up in all kinds of places no matter what.
yeah,
In In undergrad, I did history. I actually started off doing biology. I had it in my head I was going to do medical school,
yeah.
but I really didn't. I really didn't have a passion for like the study of like chemistry, and I really didn't lock into it. So I went back to what I was more comfortable with, which was like history. History was what I was always more interested in at school,
Hmm.
and I think my original plan, because I wasn't even sure I was going to go to college. I mean, that was kind of always the plan, but when I was at the end of high school, things were getting kind of weird. So it wasn't sure that like I was going to go to college, and then I moved in with my grandparents. They said go to college, so I got to go to college,
Did you
and
was it sort of like you had to like flee like some like home stuff, or what was?
it was just
Oh,
you know
sorry, you
it,
don't have to go
it,
into
it sounds
it.
yeah it sounds more dramatic, but no, it was just me and my mom's relationship kind of deteriorated
Yeah,
for a while when I was like 17, 18.
yeah,
And so, I just left living
yeah.
with her and ended up living with my grandparents. And then, we patched our relationship up later, actually, but it took a few years. We
That's like I
needed like
feel like
time apart.
Yeah, I feel like that's like a really tough time because basically when you're at that age, you're like trying to be your own self, your own adult, but then your parents, and I can totally see this happening with my kids. Where I'm like, oh my god, they're gonna be making so many mistakes and stuff, and it's like, so I think parents get a little like overly controlling at that age. So it's, yeah, and some
Yeah.
of my siblings had to go through a complicated path towards, independent adulthood. Yeah,
Yeah, it was weird. It was our relationship dynamic just really drastically changed as got closer to 18,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it it just that was just how it happened.
Yeah, but it's glad you had the grandparents, and then so then they kind of push you to like go and actually do the whole college thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I had already done like 2 years of under like community college in high school, so I finished undergrad in 3 years.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Um even with even with the change, I was able to go into history. And my original thought was, well, I'm going to finish my degree and I'll teach.
Hmm.
And I was in the history survey 2 class, which is 1865 to present. The
Hmm.
professor said, you're pretty good at writing. Have you thought about grad school? And I was like, no,
Hmm.
actually, I haven't thought about grad school at all.
Yeah.
So then I was looking around to what kind of grad schools I was going to go to and thinking about like doing a PhD in history. And I wanted to go abroad. I wanted to do my graduate work in like the UK or Ireland,
Hmm.
and I ended up not understanding how their university system works. So I applied to like the wrong degrees because
Uh,
the MA is a terminal degree, and the
oh, okay.
MPhil is the our equivalent of a master's with thesis. So I
Uh,
got into these programs that were all terminal, and I was like, oh no. So then last minute, I switched over to University of Nebraska at Kearney.
hmm.
They had a new online MA program, and the summer between uh, undergrad and grad school, I volunteered at my university's special collections. So I went to St. Leo University, which was a Benedictine school, secular now, but has that tradition. And so I'd kind of gotten some interest in libraries. It wasn't what I was thinking of for my degree, but I thought maybe I'll have something to do with like curation, history. I should just kind of look at different things. It wasn't really until I was in graduate school and applying for a lot of what I was thinking of doing was finishing my PhD and then doing a postdoc in with IMLS, and that can often be a replacement for doing the library science degree. Although, I, since then, I've learned that's not really a thing. Like, quite often, if you're going to be a librarian, they're still going to be like, well, just do even if you've got like a PhD in public history, which is basically half history, half library science, they'll still make you get the MLS degree
oh, really?
because it's just a requirement for being a librarian or for supervising librarians if you're going to be a supervisor. So
Wait, so did you,
often they'll
so
still
for the
make you
grad
do
school
it.
though, you did a master's or you did a PhD program?
I did a master's program.
Okay,
So
okay.
I didn't really know how grad school works. So I didn't my master's program didn't have a PhD program at that
Oh,
school.
got it. That's what you're
So
saying.
I
Okay, okay. Yeah, yeah,
so I couldn't elevator into it, but that was my plan. So I was applying to PhD programs.
yeah. Okay.
And I didn't get into any. It was a really rough year for getting into PhD programs. And but I'd already thought about doing that postdoc, and I'd already thought I kind of
Mm-hmm.
wanted to go into libraries. Being a professor, you have all the, still having to move across the country, but
Mm-hmm.
you've also got the lack of tenure track positions, the cobbling
Hmm.
together of a living with adjuncting. Didn't really want to do that.
Yeah,
And so I was already thinking maybe I should train to be a librarian and have a different skill set, so that I can still do history stuff, but
yeah.
I'll have a different skill set. And then I didn't get into any PhD programs. So I
Yeah.
immediately was like, well, let's just do the library science degree. So I went straight from my master's into my library science degree.
Hmm.
Immediately got a job in special collections and archives there at the University of South Florida. It was an excellent time. I loved that job. I got to process tons of stuff.
Cool.
Um, so I worked the reading room desk, so people would come in, request materials, kind of basic reference, and then the rest of the
And
time I was processing collections.
so the MLS degree is that, did you sort of like work while you're getting the degree, or did you do that and then you got this job, or was it concurrent with the MLS?
Yeah, it was a graduate assistantship.
Okay, cool.
It wasn't like a teaching one, so it didn't pay that good. I think I got paid like 11.25 an hour.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, if I had been a teaching assistant, I would have gotten paid a lot better. I would have gotten like a full like a stipend and
Yeah.
waivers and stuff. So didn't get any of that. Um, but it was a very, very good job and I did really like it. And
So did you
um
So, did you have like when you first started entering into the world of like like formal library work and training? Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do, or was it just sort of like you entered the big room and just like kind of whatever opportunities you kind of just like fell into it, or like for the special collections? Did you have an interest in that or know about it, or was it more just you kind of were feeling it out based on the opportunities that were coming in?
I mean, I'd already worked in the special collections after undergrad when I was volunteering. So I knew what special collections were. I knew what university archives were. I
Hmm.
did a lot of weeding of like old syllabuses and program stuff and like reel to reel stuff that we had no machines that could read, and making decisions with the library with the university archivist on that. So I knew what a special collections was. I knew rare books and manuscripts. I knew that was really interesting and that I enjoyed it. I worked with a lot with the student newspapers. We sent them off to be digitized, so I had to sort them out, pack them up, send them off to be digitized. So I knew about like all of this uh, trends in special collections. So I did really want that job,
Yeah,
and I think because I had the master's in history, that gave me an edge to getting
yeah,
it because I'm sure it was very competitive.
yeah. I do feel like uh, a lot of times, and this is especially like people more on the ADD side, which I'm also kind of in that trend where you sort of end up having this eclectic background, but in a way, it actually kind of ends up benefiting you because you basically can pull from all those different sources and experiences to like put it together, which is it's just a different path, but can feel a little chaotic and lonely at times, where you're sort of like you're not going as deep as like some of the other people are who are just going to do that one thing for their whole life. So I kind of have
Hmm.
had that through different career transitions where you have to, you kind of get like either kicked out or rejected, or you don't get into this or that. But then you end up using all of that training and all of that learning in whatever the next thing is that you do. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I I always say one thing that particular problem with library hiring is they don't look at the diversity of people's experiences
Uh,
and how these things can apply. So,
mhm.
um, like when I was doing this job, I actually was processing a collection about a cemetery in West Tampa that had a bunch of buryovers and mismanagement. So I had written a paper about that, and I had done this work on it, and I had listed that in my resume when I applied for my first round of library jobs after library school.
Mhm.
And after I got that job, which was a generalist librarian, it was a small private college, basically a private community college, more or less. Doesn't exist anymore, if you're wondering how that goes. Um,
Yeah.
Schools like that shouldn't exist. Um, but my director actually at some point said, I didn't understand why you'd put that in your resume, but now I see how
Oh.
your research skills transfer into
Mhm.
your passion for being a librarian.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, of course. Like obviously, but why didn't you know that? You've been in this field for 40 years. Um, and so I always said, the reason I wanted to do special collections is because I really like the research process. I really like digging into things. And when you're
Mhm.
processing collections, you do research on them. You figure out, you know, did we lose the provenance papers for this? Where did the donor come from? How do I describe something if I don't know anything about it? So you have to do preliminary research, right? You have to read
Yeah.
through it.
Yeah.
So you're doing research all the time in
Yeah.
order to prepare it for other researchers. And that's really fun because it's all the fun of research and you don't have to actually write anything at the end of it.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
really fun. Like I can see why it draws certain types of people.
Yeah, in
And
a
whenever
weird way,
someone
it's
has
like it
said,
almost like if you kind of have like an engineering mind, it's like you're kind of like putting all the pieces together and like getting the metadata
"Mhm,
all nice and curated. Like it must be very, very satisfying to have like a very well documented, complete, like indexed and metadata corpus of work for researchers to use.
it
Yeah,
is, and some people have to fight that because they tend to over process. They want to over describe something.
yeah,
And there's this thing called more product, less process, which is
uh,
we need to get through stuff so that people at least know it's there. Because if we over process everything, we'll
Uh,
never finish it all.
yeah.
So there's like a minimal cataloging thing.
Can we just pause for a second? I'm realizing the reason why the audio might be weird is because I don't have my headphones in. Let me just go grab them real quick. I'll be right back.
Sure.
I know you had.
Right,
I know you had
it
mentioned.
might. Yeah, it might cause a recording issue when you plug in your
Oh,
headphones. So let's see.
ooh.
Go ahead and try it.
Can I try it? Okay. Let me see.
Because we can always start a new recording.
Let's see here. Can you hear me? Okay. Did it
Go
cause an
ahead.
issue on your end?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I meant to do that before we jumped on.
No, it looks like it's working.
Okay. Um, yeah. So what? Where did you go after University of South Florida, or the South Florida gig?
Yeah. So then I worked at a small
Oh, that's
private
right. Oh, that's right.
university in Florida. I was a generalist librarian. Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
I was a generalist librarian. So most of the
mm-hmm.
time I was working at the desk, fixing stuff in the catalog. Uh, we didn't really have any specialized roles. So everyone just kind of did what they could. So some people would pick up interlibrary loans. Some of us picked up fixing the knowledge bases in the library management system. Some of us worked with the vendors to fix, whenever there was an access issue with ebooks or things like that. We would all pick up different things. Some of us would work with OCLC, some of us would work with the vendors. So um, it was great. And a lot of people say, your first library job, no, it's not like people can be picky, but your first library job, it's really good to be a generalist because you get to see how the whole library functions and you get to know
Yeah.
what takes the most time. And so a lot of the time is just keeping the doors open. And so people who work in a
Mm,
big research library might not appreciate how much labor that is. And they think, oh, it's really important that we do all this cataloging properly.
yeah.
It's like, no, it's really important that we keep the doors open and the desk staffed because that's where all
Mm-hmm.
the bulk of what makes a library public
So I
access
wanna
is.
I
Like
wanna
the
just put a
catalog is
pin in that
important,
for
but
later,
it needs
because
the doors need to
one of
be
the things I
open.
wrote down in my notes was
So yeah.
using. Should we or can we use physical libraries, physical books, physical, how libraries used to be before the internet, as an analogy for what digital libraries should be? And that just that image in my mind of like, keep the doors open, keep that front desk staff. I don't know if we have that right now in terms of a digital library and digital collection. We can return to that, but I love that. Like, I love like using, probably overstretched, but like using that like image of like the physical library as like an analogy somehow. But we can come back to that down the road. Yeah.
No, I think that's good because we just did an episode on Library Punk with Queer Liberation Library, and they are mostly maintaining a collection through Overdrive, which is just one vendor. And we were talking about, you know, all the other things that would make them a digital library,
Mm-hmm.
like having their own catalog so they can pull from multiple vendors. So that's kind of the digital equivalent of keeping the doors open, is having that infrastructure
Yeah.
to respond
Yeah.
to issues
Yeah.
with the software, respond to patron requests,
Yeah.
things like
Yeah.
that. So having
Yeah.
that front
Okay,
end
so
is
you
kind of the
did
same thing.
generalist library work, um, and then yeah. So how did that go? Where did you did that, like, as you were kind of surveying all the different kind of like aspects of the library? Did that kind of then focus your interest or passions in one direction?
Yeah, I started getting interested
Mm-hmm.
in open educational resources and open
Mm-hmm.
access. So we had very limited collections because we were a very small library. And so we had to rely on a lot of open access publications, which,
Mm-hmm.
didn't really have a lot of the tools to find open access stuff at the time. And it was very tricky. Like the open access fields in MARC, the 856 fields, notoriously, those links are almost always broken. So there's a big problem of like utilizing stuff, pulling it in from the catalog. And if you don't have access to it through subscription, that alternate link access for open access it's often broken. And so we really, were essentially working from the outside. And I was also, obviously a lot of our students were very poor, working class,
Hmm.
had been coming back to college. I think our average student age was about 33. So it was really important to, focus on making things affordable. And that was when I got interested in open educational resources. I had always been sort of interested in like open source
Yeah, I was actually
software
going
and
to ask you about
freeware
that. You had mentioned
and
self piracy. Yeah, I'd be
piracy.
curious to hear about it.
And so those things, yeah. Yeah, so when I published my master's thesis through ProQuest, you had an option to pay like they don't do it like this anymore, but you had an option at the time to pay like $20, $30 or something to make it open access. I'm like, well, I'm not I don't have $30. So I didn't pay it. And then I went back to them and I emailed ProQuest later and I said, hey, can I pay that now? And I want to make this open access
Closed.
because
Yeah.
no one's citing my master's thesis. And I think maybe it's because it's in ProQuest theses or dissertations and it's closed. And they said, no, you have to go through your graduate office to do
Yeah.
that. And I was like, well, I still got the file. I just put it on ResearchGate. And so that's self
Yeah.
piracy when an author
Yeah.
doesn't have access to a legal version of their own work, they self pirate, and so they put a version out there.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
I think Gary Hall had like
Um,
a chapter about that
yeah,
in one of his
ProQuest
books.
has. I've had a weird relationship with that. I forget what happened when I was submitting my dissertation, but I think I was forced to put my dissertation by my university into ProQuest. Like I think I didn't have an option. Like to graduate, I think it was. Did you have that same thing where you were forced to do that?
Yeah,
Yeah. What the fuck is up with that?
yes, that's very common. Because it provides the workflow to go through the graduate office. It provides an easy way for them to request print copies through ProQuest, which was weird because at my university we didn't order the print copies through ProQuest, but I
Yeah,
still had to put it
yeah.
in
I
there.
think
But I
I
had
don't
to
know if
send
I
mine
had to
off to a
do that, but I
bookbinder.
definitely had physical copies, but it wasn't through ProQuest. Like, uh, yeah, I don't know. That's the problem in a nutshell, right there, probably. But um, yeah. Anyways,
It's convenient. It's convenient. It keeps track of it for them. You can push it back to the student and say fix this. It's a software as a service, and it's not really about storing or promoting the
but
work.
yeah,
It's
but
really
this
about
kind of
just
gets at it.
providing
Like,
a workflow that
why
is
does
easy for the
that have
university.
to be
And s-
completely intertwined with owning that content and not being like you described posting it on ResearchGate as self piracy? Like that's fucking insane that's considered
Mhm,
self piracy. Like, I mean, I don't know. That's the part that really gets me is like I totally get. I mean, I'm in tech, right? I mean, I
mhm,
get like software as a service. I get like you know UI, UX, all that stuff, and like smoothing out these workflows. But they get greedy and go one step further and like own the copyright, control the content, and it's like it drives me crazy, right? Like, and I feel like at some point, a tech company is going to take whatever you give them, right? Like they're especially for profit, like their whole goal is to create the walled garden so they can milk it as much as they can. That's on the university to be like, this is crossing an academic freedom line, and like, yeah, okay, we're going to pay for this, but we get to do whatever the fuck we want with this content. Like, these are dissertations and stuff. Anyway, sorry. I'll save my rant for the end, but
yeah, and
yeah.
and that has been changing. So a lot of universities, the university I most recently worked at,
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Board of
That's awesome.
Regents rules said that students own the academic work that they create. And so when you
Okay.
submitted to ProQuest did not ask for a
That's great.
copyright
Okay. All
transfer.
right.
They did ask for a
So things
license,
are happening.
obviously, to post it
Okay. That's great.
in their software. But yeah, that those norms are changing because like when I emailed ProQuest, back the 8 or 9 years ago, the reason they wanted me to go through my graduate office
Uh,
is what if the
yeah,
university
that's
had a
true.
copyright claim to my dissertation, to
Okay.
my master's thesis, right? So that was why they wanted me to go through them. But I think
Mm,
there are many places where they don't claim student work as their copyright anymore. Although at
mm,
the small private university I worked at, they did claim pretty much everything you made on the clock as their copyright, which is
Yeah.
interesting in those situations where you then publish in a
Yeah.
journal, um, where you
Yeah.
sign away copyright that you
Yeah.
technically
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
have the right to sign away
Yeah.
because your
That's interesting.
employer has already claimed it.
Um, okay, so I think I got us a little off track there. So where are we um in your uh kind of background career stuff? So you're are you still in South Florida? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm there three
Okay.
years,
And is that the layoff
and
that
then
just
I'm laid
happened
off.
that you were
So there had
mentioning?
been a bunch of layoffs.
Ah, okay.
So I'm
Okay. Well, I do want to hear about that, but
no,
we
I
can do
quit.
that later.
I recently just
Ah,
quit
okay.
my job. But no, I was laid off back in 2018. Yeah, I 2018 I was laid off. No notice. Obviously, that's how
Uh,
layoffs go. I was locked out of my email before I was even in the final meeting. So
mm,
I was there. There've been something like 12 rounds of layoffs after I got laid off. They had just fired the university president a few months before. So after I got laid off, I like called him up and I was like, "Hey, want to get a beer?" And we talked about it. He said, there's been like
oh my
14
God,
waves of
that's
layoffs
crazy.
in the time I was there, and he was there for like 2 years. Um, yeah, so I had already been applying for
Hmm.
jobs. I'd already applied for a job at the university I just
Hmm.
worked at, and I didn't get that job. I was applying for a digital archivist job, and so the dean said, um, please apply again. We had two good candidates. You were both good. We had to pick one of you. And so, please apply for one of our other jobs. And I was like, okay, whatever. I got laid off. First thing I
Hmm.
did was I emailed him and said, hey, I just got laid off. What's open? They had a scholarly communications job open. He really wanted me to apply for a metadata librarian job. I was like, I don't really want to do that. Um, I'm not
Hmm.
really like a big cataloger head. I don't really like doing that all the time as my main thing. I like being more
Hmm.
processing other stuff or working with researchers directly. So scholar communications sounded pretty good. I was already doing the open educational resources. I had already worked in
Hmm.
open access, so I tried to create an institutional
Okay.
repository out of. We had free access to Content DM, so I turned that into our institutional repository because we didn't have special collections. And so I was trying to convince faculty, like, hey, you should put your articles in our repository. And they didn't really get it. And we weren't a research facility anyway, so it didn't really matter.
Hmm.
So I already had kind of gone down certain Skullcom avenues, and this gave me a chance to really focus on it. And I had a pretty strong idea of like what I wanted to do when
Hmm.
the scholar communications job was open. I had an idea of like what this is. This is a job that is outreach focused. I need to convince people open access is important. I'm not going to have any
Hmm.
ability to force them to do it. I need the unforced force of a better argument. So I need to convince them it's worth their time, that I can make it worth their time, that it's important. A lot of people tend to do like moral
That doesn't
arguments,
work
like
well.
it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's great. That'll convince
Yeah.
people a little bit. It doesn't work well. You have to make it
Yes.
easy to do. You have to make it easier than the
Yes.
default. So
Yes.
everything you
Yes.
can do that makes it easier to make something open access, you have to do it. So, one thing to grow our institutional repository at my last job, which I was at for 6 years, so 2018 to
Hmm.
2025. So yeah, I was coming up on 7 years. So one thing we did was we would reach out to people and say, hey, we just saw, we would have all these alerts for the university. So if someone published a paper, we would know they just published. We say, hey, we saw you just published this. Send us this version. So we need your accepted manuscript. There's going to be an
Hmm.
embargo or there's not going to be an embargo. We had all these templates for the email.
Yeah.
And then just send us the file.
Yeah.
We'll put it in the
Absolutely. I love that.
repository.
I love that so
Massively
much.
expanded the
Yeah.
repository doing it that way. Um, It's the only way
Yes.
it can work.
Yes.
A repository
Yes.
cannot work by just building it and waiting for people. It has to have an outreach aspect because repositories are work. People have to
Yeah.
go in, create an account, put in the metadata, find the file, put it in there.
Yeah.
Too much. If you have a repository, you have to have a repository manager. That is the
Yeah.
important part of
Yeah.
the program. You need to think of your
Yeah. I
repository as a
love that. Yeah.
program and as a service, not as a piece of software. So anytime you have anything like, do you want to build a GIS lab? Well, you better have a lab assistant or a lab manager because it is a service. And if you just put it there, people aren't going to use it. They need, you know, how are you going
Yeah.
to track statistics? How are you going to show people are using it? How do you know which classes are in there? You know, I just finished creating this proposal for a GIS lab, and I insisted we have
Yeah.
to hire a position for this. Otherwise, it's going to be a locked door, and people are only going to go in there when a professor has a class. And we're going
Yeah.
to have
Yeah.
$200,000 worth of
Mhm.
equipment just sitting behind a locked door all day. You have to have someone in there to book the
Mhm.
space, to maintain it, to let people to supervise it, and you have to think of it as a service. And so that's the same thing with repositories, whether that's like OER Commons for people. This is one thing that's been a big problem for OER is, you know, the the open licensing allows people to copy it and use it and modify it, but people haven't really gotten the sharing it back out part. And it's the repository problem, because sharing it back out, you have to deposit it somewhere. And a lot of these repositories for OER don't have someone going, hey, did you modify that? Let's put it in there, doing that for you. We had a Pressbooks instance, for example, and people are always creating, faculty are always creating their own materials in like SoftChalk or in Blackboard. Say,
Mhm.
hey, just export that, send it to us. We'll put it in Pressbooks for
Yeah.
you. You can see
Yeah.
how it looks, and then we'll publish it as an
Absolutely. Yeah.
OER.
Yeah. Because I
But
mean,
you have to make
yeah,
it
and
easier.
this kind of goes back to like the moralistic arguments. It's like a lot of researchers are where you're just fucking busy, and like this is like even if you're totally aligned ethically, you're just I mean you're so much shit that you're doing, right? And like a lot of these things are like, and also publishers and people do a really good job of making sure that their products and services are aligned, sometimes in unethical ways, with their career advancement, right? So they've invested a lot of time in figuring out how to like capture those users, capture those customers,
Hmm.
and sometimes with some of these policies, you're asking people to put their kind of sacrifice aspects of their career or career advancement to do these other things, and that is also changing quite a bit, especially with like the citation bumps and stuff like that with open access. But we're kind of seeing it all over again with like the fact that they're just racking up the price of APCs, which is now cutting people out of the loop, right? It's kind of like the
Yeah.
blindfold is getting moved down over the mouth, and now it's like you have to pay a lot to publish. You can't speak anymore, but anyways, I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah. So that's yeah. I love all that. Okay, so what? Okay, so do you want to? So that was so that took you through to your last position, and you just left that position like a couple months ago. Monday. Okay. How are you doing, by the
Like
way? Are you
Monday.
okay? Is this are you still kind of processing?
I'm good. You know, I've never this has been a very lucky trait for me, but I've always never been
Mm-hmm.
impulsive. I've always known
Mm-hmm.
when to back out of something and say like, okay, I'm done with this. I'm out of this. And that served me extremely well. You know, like in undergrad, I was in ROTC, and I was like, I don't want to do this. This is bad. This is a bad thing. I don't want to be in the army. I don't want to do this shit. Out and backed out, even though every society force was like, you know, my family is very conservative, evangelical. Everything was telling me this is the right thing to do. This makes you
Yeah,
a good person.
that's
And
awesome.
just knowing when to go, nope, I'm out, and just
Mm-hmm.
quit it. So that's been very good for me. And so quitting this job. So what happened was when I was hired for this job, I reported to an associate dean, and even from the very beginning, there were issues with him. He would call me on the phone, say, "Can you come to my office?" Close the door, and then he would just have these really intense sort of like, you know, what about that? So, did you?
Yeah.
Were you? Was this? Was that? And these interrogation type meetings, and they were very like emotionally intense. And I was not falling for it because I'd already had a shitty boss when I was 17. So I was like, I knew what he was doing. I was like, okay, you're just a bad supervisor, but whatever. So I put up with this for years, and then I was supervising another librarian, and she was about to become a full-time
Yeah.
librarian, and then he started doing this to her in a meeting I was in, and I was like, this isn't going to happen. So I said she needs to report to the dean, and so the dean moved both of us over to him. um,
Oh, and then you guys went
and
back
then
together.
that dean left a couple months ago,
Uh,
and so the associate dean, I had to go back to him. So Oh, I'm sorry, I quit Tuesday. Monday, he called me in, did the same thing, called me on the phone, said we'd had meetings. We'd had meetings. I was like, oh, it could be better this time. It seems like he's got it. Then I get a phone call. He says, can you come up to my office? So, and at the moment I got that phone call, I was like, I know what's going to happen. So I went in there. He goes, close the door, close the door. And then he said, did you get canceled on social media? I was like, what the fuck are you
Oh my
talking
god!
about, dude?
Seriously?
And apparently I had mentioned getting my Twitter blocked in
Yeah.
a work meeting. The thing is, I haven't had that Twitter account
Yeah.
in like a year and a half. I don't know when the fuck I mentioned this in a meeting. And he was like, well, that's unacceptable to talk about in work. I'm like, okay, sure. And then he said, and then he was like, did you work remote Friday? I said, yeah. And he said, we're 100% back in the office. I'm like, well, that's not true. We've had agreements for uh letting people work remote if they need to. And he goes, yeah, well,
Yeah.
and I was like,
Yeah.
should I have asked you? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, sure, no problem. And then we talked about, other stuff, and I left that meeting, and I was just like,
Yeah. You were
the
just like,
dread of
fuck this.
knowing that those meetings were going to start happening again, just it ruined me for that. I was angry. I felt cornered. I
Yeah.
was anxious knowing that these were coming back. And I spent the whole afternoon just like unable to do anything,
Yeah.
knowing that that's going to happen. I'm like, this is going to ruin my relationship with my boyfriend. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I got a long distance relationship. I can't be stressed from work like this and maintain a relationship. So I've already been applying for jobs for a few months, and so I was pretty upset. I talked to my mom about it a little bit, and I've talked to my boyfriend, obviously, and then I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to clean out my
Yeah.
office to see if it makes me feel better. To just like to
Yeah.
just be like, get all this shit out of here. I don't care about this job. I'm putting space between me and the job. So, I'm going to have an empty office. I'm going to be in there, and I'm going to be, you know,
And so that was
and
like
so I
Tuesday,
cleared out the office,
or
and I
this
was
was
like,
like,
I
or
still
this
want to
was
quit.
last week, or Tuesday morning. Okay.
And so
Yeah.
Tuesday
Right.
morning, yeah, this is this week. So Monday, the meeting happened.
Yeah.
Tuesday, uh, I cleaned out my office all morning. So by about noon, I was done, and I called my boyfriend on his lunch break, and I said, I really want to quit. And because we're planning
Yeah.
on living together, and so I'm applying for
Wait. So
jobs where
where
he
you're in?
lives.
Are you still in
So
Florida?
it's in another state and everything. And
Oh,
I was
Texas
like,
now. Okay.
I'm
Sorry. And then, oh, sorry, because I didn't figure.
I'm in Texas now.
Wait, what's the university? Or you don't have to say it if you
Yeah,
don't want to. That you were just. Yeah, it's okay.
uh,
Yeah.
I
Okay, that's
try and
fine.
keep like
And so
I
then
don't
you
make
would
it
be
too
moving
easy
to
for
a
people
different
on the
state.
internet to find me if they're being weird about it.
Oh, nice. Cool. My mom's from Massachusetts. Yeah.
So I'll be moving to Massachusetts is my plan. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I'm trying to move up to Boston, and obviously it's very difficult
Yeah.
to land an academic job. It takes
Yeah.
months and months and months, and so I've been doing these applications for months, and yeah, I called him on the phone. I said I still want to quit, and I'm generally not this impulsive. Usually I would wait probably until I got fired, honestly. And I was like, I can't do
mm,
this. This is going to jeopardize our relationship if I don't
yeah.
quit, because I can't be this upset all the time, and I
Yeah.
can't go into this depression that I will need to
Yeah.
do to put up with this guy again. I will need to kind of shut down
Guy. Yeah.
emotionally. I can't be emotionally available and deal with this shit at work. And so yeah, then
mm,
I'd already written my resignation letter that morning before I went to work. I had already written my
mm,
handoff letters to the 3 librarians I supervised. Um, and so I went in, I printed out my resignation letter. I made
mm,
2 copies of it. I put my employee
yeah.
ID in the envelope because I have to give my employee ID to your supervisor when you resign. Went up to his office, closed the door, um, handed in the envelope, said it's my resignation effective immediately. And I said I didn't write a reason, but I can't handle these meetings anymore, and I'm not going to tell anyone why I'm quitting. And then I went to the administrative assistant. I said, "Here's my resignation, effective immediately." Um, the keys are in my office. I'll be out of here in 5
That's
minutes.
awesome.
Went downstairs,
Good for
sent
you,
the
man. I
emails,
feel
keys
like,
were on the desk, locked the door,
yeah,
walked
like
out.
you're saying, like that's like such an important life skill just to know when to back out, right? Because you could have been tortured for like or just miserable for another like month or two, and then have the exact
Hmm.
same end result, right? Like, yeah. And sometimes it's like it's not always like you're saying, it's not always
Yeah.
good to listen to your gut, but sometimes your gut is screaming at the top of his lungs like there is something not right about this, and so it's good to be able to listen to that. Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's why I felt pretty good about it, because it wasn't like
Yeah. Yeah.
this was just impulsive. I've already been planning on leaving.
Yeah.
It's just I'm leaving
Yeah.
on a
I
different
almost feel like
timeline
I
than I
need
thought I was going
that
to.
same sort of fire to get me onto my next thing. Like I've been slowly applying for things, but yeah, it's almost like I need something to happen to like cuz I don't know, I feel like you can be applying for stuff, but I feel like you don't really ever get the next thing until you're like, "Oh, I absolutely need a job like in the next month or two." So
It's you feel completely different. My boyfriend said like yesterday, he's like, you seem like you're really on top of things now. And it's because like, yeah, you go into work, you send off some applications, you leave work. You go
yeah.
into work, you get the
Yeah.
rejection emails, you leave work. Nothing changes.
Yeah.
Right. So there is like it you don't have that focus. And so yeah, the moment I quit, I was like, all right, um, here's my plan. I'm going to sell my house. Here's my plan for leaving. Here's my plan for, I'm going to go stay with my mom. Uh, you know, um, and the plans have
Mm.
changed. Now I'm actually going to be moving up to Boston as soon as I can. I'll be staying with him. But it's and it kind of occurred to me like this could be the better way of doing this, because now I don't have to sell the
Yeah.
house and when's my start date
Yeah.
and find a place to live. I get to
Yeah.
do it in stages now, so I've got time. I'm going to get the house ready to
Mhm.
sell, leave, put it on the market.
Oh yeah. I think they're going to come to Boston?
The thing is I've got the bunnies, so I've got 3 rabbits.
Okay.
And so
Okay. That's smart.
they will eventually, but now I'm going to leave them with my mom. So that was the biggest problem, is like,
Wait, what kind of bunnies are they? Like the
I
big
need a place
white
for them because
fluffy
they take
bunnies?
up a lot of space. They're pretty big. They need
Uh,
a lot of roof.
oh,
Yeah, they're Californians.
nice.
So you can see them back there.
That's awesome. Oh, nice.
And the
I
other
love
2
that.
are right in
Yeah.
front.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're pretty big, and they take up a lot of space, and they eat a lot, and
Yeah.
so there's no room
Mhm.
in his place. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's it's all worked out, more or less.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a job lined up. I'm trying to get out 1 job application a day. I
Mm.
started a fundraiser for Library Punk to cover the costs of hosting and paying guests
Yeah.
and
Um,
everything, because I've been paying for that out of
yeah, I
pocket
know somebody
for the
else who's
past 4 years.
she quit her job and we're working together on
So
a couple of projects, but she's doing podcasting full time, and she's just now trying to figure out how to like maybe monetize is too strong of a word, but just to make it a living for herself. So she might have some ideas. But I would love to hear about the podcast. Can you just kind of jam for a little bit on that? Like, how did it get started? How did you meet the co-hosts? I mean, it seems like such an incredible wealth of information and just discussions. I mean, how you guys have, it was like a couple hundred episodes, right? 200 episodes? 150? Yeah, that's awesome.
150.
What was
I
the
think
inception? Like,
we're
how
on
did you guys
145
meet?
right
Did
now,
one
I
person
think.
start and then other people joined on, or what was the origin story?
I had the idea for it
Hmm.
probably about 2017. Um and I mean, kind of everything, like the rabbit logo and iconography, um the title I had from 2017, Library Punk.
Oh, okay, cool.
And then didn't really do anything with it. And then COVID, it was a COVID project. So it's 2021 we started. I was going a little stir crazy, and library Twitter was pretty popular. And I'd been on library Tumblr before that. So in special collections, because Tumblr is long
Huh.
form, a lot of special collections were
Huh.
really, really active on Tumblr. And it was an amazing time to be a librarian
Nice.
on Tumblr from like 2012 to 2015, 2016. And all these special collections were creating blogs, all these librarians were creating blogs. And that was where I met Sadie and Jay. And so me and Sadie have been friends, pretty close friends for about 10 years now. Jay, I knew, but sort of tangentially. We didn't really talk all that much
So you started
until
it
I
just
invited him
yourself,
to be on the
and then had them
podcast.
on as guests.
Um, and no, I was basically what I did is
Uh-huh.
I had a pitch for the idea, and I was reaching out to people I would wanted to be on the podcast as because my original
Mm-hmm.
idea was it was kind of modeled on Trash Future. So if you know the podcast Trash Future, they have a lot of guests. They're not
Ah.
all on every episode, or they have a lot of hosts. They're not all on every episode. It's a mixture of comedy and like
Mm-hmm.
leftist politics,
Mm-hmm.
and they talk about technology. And it's like, what if we do the same thing for libraries? And so that was kind of the idea. And so I just reached out to people. Some people said no. Some people didn't really get back to me. Um, but Sadie, Jane, Carrie did. And so
Nice.
that was the original lineup, was the four of us. And so from episode 1,
Okay.
we were on there. Carrie left about a year in. And so we never got a new host, because honestly, once you have like, the thing about having 4 hosts is
Yeah.
once you have 5 people on a podcast,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
kind of the upper limit. 6 people, it gets really hard to edit. Like it
Mm.
exponentially gets harder going from 5 to
Yeah.
6. I don't know why that is, but having more than 5 is just really hard. The editing is just nuts. So it's kind of been easier having 3 hosts and just having guests that have been on several times. Dorothy Asalo, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's other people we've had on
Mm.
multiple times that I'm forgetting right now, but Dorothy is one of our go-tos. Um, and we kind of didn't plan on doing it weekly. I was thinking every other week, but we did the first episode, and I think Carrie was like, "All right, next week we're going." I'm like, "Okay." So we just have stuck to trying to get one out a week.
Yeah.
And you just keep doing it, and eventually you have 145 episodes. So
Yeah.
the,
And
the
well, it's kind
trick
of
is to
interesting.
just keep
Yeah,
doing it.
hearing you talk about it,
There's
because
really no trick.
to be honest with you, I was kind of going to record like a final thing, which was just kind of like me talking about, like, because I kind of did this as sort of a somewhat of an impulsive, like, oh, let me just like kind of try this out, pilot it, see how it goes. And you DM'd me right when I was like, okay, I'm just gonna record this final thing. Like, hey, I did this thing, just kind of, this is my like learning from it or whatever. And I was basically gonna stop. So I'm definitely gonna post this one. And then, but it's kind of giving me a bit of energy to, yeah, like you said, just kind of keep going. And I think my biggest bottleneck right now is sourcing people to come
Hmm.
on. And yeah, I mean, we don't have to get into this, kind of more on my side, but uh, you know, yeah, what I wanted to do was talk to a
Hmm.
ton of librarians, and I think some of the questions I'm asking just seem to be very like offensive or something, or I don't know. I need to figure that out. I need to figure out like how I'm talking about this stuff, or maybe I'm just not talking to the right librarians. Um, but yeah, I mean, you had kind of said earlier in this conversation that the library community can be a bit insular, and I think I'm kind of hitting up against that. Like I've talked to researchers who I'm very much aligned with, and we have like a lot of the same ideas about some of this stuff. And they didn't want to talk publicly about anything that had to do with libraries because they know that there's like sensitivities around some of these topics. And then that with like a lot of the like other librarians just like not feeling
Hmm.
comfortable talking about some of the stuff. It was sort of this like I had this like weird feeling about it all, where it's like, okay, I don't know, maybe I'm just like coming on a little too strong or a little too blunt, or maybe just the fact that I'm not in the library community. It's like weird for me to be kind of wanting to talk about this stuff. So yeah, I've had kind of a weird relationship with the topic, and so I'm sort of at this on the fence right now about like, should I keep going with this? Maybe I need to like refocus, so I'm like a little bit more in my lane. But I'm very deeply moved to, even if it is as a researcher, like probe this question of like, yeah, like what, like what's going on with the library, like what is the library, what should the library be like, and taking this long view of like what should happen over the next 50 years. But I don't know, did you run into any of that as well, where you felt like, I mean, you're in the community, so it's a little bit different, I
Yeah.
think, but
Well,
okay.
I mean, we've never limited ourselves to just talking to librarians. I think a lot of the trick for asking a
Hmm.
guest is just to be genuinely
Yeah.
interested in what they have to say and just say, "Hey, you're doing this really cool thing,
Yeah.
and I saw you talking about it.
Okay.
Would you like to talk about it with me?" And I think that's the trick,
Hmm.
is to kind of go where they're already at. And so we talk about, that's why we talk about all kinds of stuff. Some of the
Yeah.
episodes, we don't really get into the politics because I'm not setting the agenda. um, I usually say, "Hey, send me anything you want me to read." Or if like someone's published
Hmm.
a report or someone's published a paper, say, "Hey, that was really cool. Want to come on and talk about it?" "Hey, what you're
Yeah.
doing is really cool. Want to come on and talk about it?" And I think honestly, that's the easiest way to do it.
Hmm.
Even with our biggest guests,
Hmm.
like Chuck Tingle, probably our most famous guest, or Cory Doctorow. Um, I just said, "Hey, I saw your Tumblr post about how the Texas Library
Yeah.
Association was really
Yeah.
shitty to you. Do you want to come on
That's
and talk
awesome.
about it? We're big fans." And he said, "Yeah."
Hmm.
And so it's really, it doesn't matter who it is. I mean, some people just really don't
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
want to be recorded and talk. And I think also I think compared to when we started,
Hmm.
there's also a lot more
Yeah.
cynicism cynicism about social media.
People are
And so
hiding
I
a little
think
bit.
people just kind of don't
Hmm.
want to be out there, and they just don't want to engage. I think that's slowly been happening as like
Yeah.
X descended into
Yeah.
a fascist hellhole. People started getting off of there, and it took a long time to find some of those people again, and find
Yeah.
them on Discord, and find
Yeah.
them on, convince them like, "Hey,
Yeah.
get on Blue Sky. Come on, man. Just come on Blue Sky. It'll be like old times. Come on."
Hmm.
And part of the reason, when we started out, we didn't have a
Yeah.
Discord. And one of the reasons we started one
Yeah.
is so many people were leaving Twitter that we couldn't keep up with people anymore.
Hmm.
And so we needed
Yeah.
our own
I
little
was on
community just to
Reds
keep
for
in
a little
touch.
while, and it was kind of weird. It was like this weird, like some of my like Instagram friends, which is mostly like friends and family, but like not the people that I would have the types of conversations I was having on Twitter. And there was just not a lot of researchers and scientists there. So Blue Sky was it was like very much a breath of fresh air. I was a little late to come there,
Hmm.
but it was like, oh my gosh, there's like actual like Skullcom people here. There's researchers and scientists again. So hopefully it continues to grow. I don't think it's quite where side Twitter and like some of the Skullcom community was, but it's like about half, I would say. Was that what you would say?
No, it's
Yeah,
not.
it's good enough.
It's good enough.
Hmm.
It scratches, I'm still meeting new people. I'm still hearing from
Hmm.
other people, but there's also some people who are still, not posting anymore. And,
Yeah,
you wonder like, I should send them an email or something. But yeah, the Skullcom Discord has been great because I mean, that's the only place where
yeah.
that
So
level of
actually, tell me about that
engagement still
Discord. Is that
happens.
specific
So
to
the
your
Skullcom
podcast, or is
Shit
that
Talk
just like kind of a
Discord.
separate thing that you
Um,
created to kind of collect Skullcom folks? Oh,
oh, I didn't
AJ.
create it.
Okay.
It's AJ Boston runs it. And it's
Okay.
for
I should hop on there.
it's for Skullcom people.
Yeah, because he was one of the people that I've been missing. He was on Blue Sky for a little while, I thought, or Threads, or one of them. But yeah, I miss his hot takes. Okay, I need to jump on there.
Uh,
Yeah.
it might be, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I know he quit Twitter. I
Mm.
think probably because it was taking up too much time. So
Okay.
I think that's why he's not on Blue Sky. But yeah, we talk all the time. But yeah, it's having those discords and stuff, having the community of people like, okay, this
Yeah.
isn't going to break containment. I'm not going to get screamed at by a stranger. So yeah, no, the Library Punk does have a Discord. We put the link in the episodes, so I don't post
Yeah.
it on
Yeah.
like social media because I don't want people just clicking it and joining. But if you've listened to an episode, scroll through the
That.
description, then you'll see the join the Discord. And it's like, okay, those people who've done that minimum
Yeah.
amount of
Nice.
screening.
Um.
So we haven't had any
Okay.
issues yet.
So we're pretty much caught up to where you are now. So I guess before I talk about like library, like kind of like future library stuff and kind of more abstract library shit, what what direction, just what direction are you heading in for, like kind of what's coming up for you for your own career in the next like 6 months? Are you like, what kind of jobs are you applying for? What, like, what would be your ideal kind of next step?
Yeah, I mean, when you're applying in a particular place, you tend to apply more broadly. So I'm
Oh,
applying
that's
to a lot
right,
of
because
jobs that I
you're trying to be
normally
in
like
Boston,
are
so
I
you're
wouldn't say are on the
broadening the net a little bit.
Skullcom
Yeah,
like
yeah,
career path. 'Cause- yeah, so I'm trying to be in one place. So yeah, so there are a lot of jobs I'm applying for that I wouldn't normally, but there's so many libraries in Boston that they still pop up. So, research data management jobs, head of special
yeah,
collection, of head of scholar communications. The exact same job I have or had. Um, and but I've been applying for jobs in the public libraries. I've been applying for special collections focused jobs, digital archivist jobs.
hmm
Um,
yeah. Well, good
yeah,
luck with
stuff
that.
just
I
is
know
opening up all the
it's
time.
definitely
So
tough to apply for jobs. It's definitely like a soul crushing experience where there's just a lot of rejection and a lot of like, okay, I got to like keep slogging through this. So, uh, but it's also fun. I mean, it's a good.
yeah, I mean, like yeah, I applied for one today where it would pull in not just my special collections, but my scholarly communications expertise, and I would be working with collections
Hmm,
which were the same thing that I worked on for
that's
my master's
awesome.
thesis.
Hmm,
So, like Caribbean history in the early modern period. So, like, I'm really excited about that job. I really hope I get an interview because, like, everything up to this point
yeah,
could focus right on that job and all this eclectic background that we went over. That's
yeah,
exactly what this
yeah.
job
That's
wants.
awesome.
I could be the perfect candidate. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well,
I'm hoping,
fingers crossed for that.
but yeah,
Um,
it's you
okay,
never know.
so drifting up, not maybe totally into the clouds, but just kind of getting a little bit more kind of general and abstract. So yeah, just like kind of pulling from all of your kind of experiences and background, what, like where, like if you had to say what a library is, like just right now, like yeah, where like, well, so yeah, so tell me what you think a library is, and then I kind of want to move towards thinking like if we're there right now, like do we have a library right now, particularly in relation to like like digital infrastructure and digital library. But first, just when I ask you, kind of get back into like 5 year old mode, like what is a library? How would you define a library?
I would say ultimately, I mean, library history is pretty complicated. Um, I think most libraries throughout history have been extensions of the state, have been a means of record keeping and a means of either record keeping for the state or record keeping for the very wealthy. And those are kind of the
Mm-hmm.
two ways
Or
that
the
libraries
church,
came about, as like private collections and state
like long
collections.
ago. Yeah,
And the yeah,
yeah,
or
that's
the
true.
church,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, that's true.
I was lumping that in with the state more or less. And so yeah, that tradition, that monastic tradition, um, was for keeping records, but also led to a diversity of the arts and a diversity of culture and diversity of religious thinking, philosophy, and scholarship. It was a home of scholarship. But thinking about like a library in the modern world, the invention of kind of the free public library changed that dynamic, permanently. And now we think of libraries as place where people go to enrich themselves in some way, for to find community, to read, to spend time, to catch up on newspapers, magazines, to learn how to read as children, to learn a love of reading, to do research, and to interact with the government, to find tax forms, to apply for benefits, to have a warm place to sit for a couple hours, to have a place
Mm-hmm.
to take a shit. That's really important. And so they provide a really important function for society, as and so public libraries in that way have really changed um, how we think of libraries, and it changed academic libraries too to be more like the public libraries, so that public universities often or almost always have to be open to the public. So public university libraries have to have regular public access as well, even though ultimately the databases
Yeah.
and everything are only purchased for the students and faculty and staff. So there's still that
Where you
limitation,
can
but there's
still
usually like a public
search.
access computer somewhere. It's but again, with university parking, with the lack of public spaces
Hmm.
for public
Hmm.
patrons, I mean, we really do a lot to keep the public out. It is a shame, particularly because we spend so much money on these databases and things that many
Hmm.
public libraries can't have
Yeah.
unless you're in a very, very big metropolitan area. My local public library,
Hmm.
their ebook system's not very great. They use Libby.
Hmm.
The way I can request stuff is not very great. But I'm sure they have really great programming for like kids. I'm sure they
Hmm.
have really great. I'm sure they do story times. I'm sure they have in-person programming. It's
Yeah.
just not
Yeah.
meeting my
Yeah.
needs as like an adult with no children. But it's
Hmm.
it's. But if I needed to do local history research, I know there's stuff there. If I
Yeah.
needed to
Yeah.
um, have a place to use a public computer, I know it's there for me. And so it is still that ultimate, like, it's a very interesting thing because it is public libraries and public university libraries are still ultimately agents of the state. They still ultimately are doing something that the state wants. But because of their sort of pseudo independence, and I think part of it is the reverence people have for books and the reverence people
Hmm.
have for libraries as these almost pseudo religious institutions, that has honestly kept the state uh, away, in the same way that like public
Yeah.
universities in many ways were able to be kind of co-sovereign. Give us the money
Yeah.
and we will do the stuff you want us to do, but don't tell us how to do it. And that dynamic for both public
Yeah.
libraries and for public universities is obviously
Yeah.
under threat, and there's a rising threat of
Yeah.
government interference and saying like, no, you're not
Yeah.
co-sovereign, you are
Yeah. I mean,
subservient
I
to
don't know if we
what
want
the
to go
political
down that
project
path, but
is.
like I'm definitely noticing like people are being tested right now, right? And like there was just a thing about one of the academic institutions capitulating to some of the Trump terminology lists and stuff, and it's these are the moments where you kind of see like what who the leaders are, right? And sometimes bureaucrats are not as good as other people in standing up to bullies. So I'm hoping I'm hoping that people are yeah.
I think the bureaucrats. I think the
The
bureaucrats are better at it. I
politicians.
think the
Yeah.
university presidents and the ones who are
Yes.
paid to interact with,
That's true. That is
to
true.
do semi political jobs, are the ones doing a very bad job. I think the people who are saying, "Oh, okay, I'll give you access, but first you've got to sign this form and this form and this form, and you've got to tell me this, and you've got to prove to me that a judge said this was legal." Those people are That's bureaucracy, and
Yeah,
those
that's
and
true.
bureaucracy is good. Bureaucracy has
Yeah.
momentum. It keeps things
Uh,
moving. I mean, yeah. If
nice.
we could have
Yeah.
bureaucracy without a government, I'd be all for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just people getting
Yeah.
shit done day in, day out, having excess capacity to get things done in a
Yeah.
hurry.
Well,
That's
yeah, and
that's
that's like
important. I mean,
yeah,
states are
and that's
very
what's
good
so crazy
inventions.
about what's happening right now is
They have a
that
lot of
like
downsides, but
there's a relatively apolitical people who are just like, hey, I just want to do good shit for my country, and I'm doing this job, and I'm getting paid less to do this. Uh, and like those are the people that are getting fucked with right now, in service of let's make this more political, let's make this more an arm of the political, winds as they're blowing. Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, sorry. I feel like we could probably have done that for a while. I want to get back to the library stuff. So yeah, one of the things that I have
mhm.
have actually really picked up having some like a lot of these conversations is the physical aspect of the library, which was definitely not on my radar at the beginning of having these conversations. But it's funny because I definitely love going to the library. At UCLA, just like going into that library. I've never used the library to like get information, and it was never been like a source of knowledge for me. But walking in there, sitting at the desk, just like I mean, UCLA has such a beautiful library. Again, it really there's this like physical value to the libraries that's just very inspiring. And I mean, it's kind of silly, but even just seeing all the books there, and if I did want to go and peruse them, it's just there's something very kind of magical about it. But so oh, I'm sorry. I do. Yes,
You don't use
like
the
Content
databases
Central
either
and
for your
like and if
research.
there's like
You just
subscriptions and memberships and stuff like that. I do on the digital side. Yeah, but that's all. Yeah, yeah. But like, I would never go into the
well, like the physical
library
stuff you're
for
not
that
using.
purpose. It was like I would just do it for my laptop. You know, that's more the digital infrastructure. Um, um.
Yeah.
So okay, so but then kind of shifting into like the digital space. Um, yeah, like how would you define like what a digital library should be, or I guess acknowledging, but then setting aside that those physical things, which I think are important and shouldn't be, deprioritized, but just in the sense of like a digital library or a library in the sense of like source of knowledge or like the stewards of knowledge or the this is like how we're preserving, protecting, and organizing scholarly information for the next generation. Kind of, what are your thoughts and feelings on where we are now, uh, like the online connected digital library sense? Like like how would you define what that should be, and where do you think we are right now, and what's the gap between those two?
Going back to like the physical analogy, there isn't one because the main problem between a physical library services and a digital library services is copyright and licensing. And when you buy a book, you own it, and you have a right under the law to do whatever you want with your property. So you can, if you have bought something, you can loan it to someone, you can destroy it, you can do anything you want with it. And so a library can buy all the physical materials it wants, and it can do whatever it wants with them, including like some things in the
Mm-hmm.
Copyright Act allow for making backups for preservation or for sharing through interlibrary loan, things like that. When it comes to our digital libraries, say I wanted to start a digital library that had, say, Queer Liberation Library. They have a library. They are essentially just a group of volunteers who maintain a Overdrive account. And Overdrive is a vendor. They don't own any of the books. They pay for checkouts. They pay for permanent licenses. But they are ultimately just licensing. They don't own any of the books that in the same way that you would own books on the shelf. So we don't have digital first sale. And this is something that is very, has been a problem because computers are copying machines. And so long as you have copyright, anything
Yeah.
that a computer does is going to interact with copyright intensely. So, whenever you're streaming something onto your computer is making a local copy. Even if you're not downloading it, it is stored in your temporary memory of your computer. And so a computer does make a copy no matter what it does. It's a copying machine. And so the way our laws are written and the way our conceptualization of intellectual property works, it means that there's really no way that you can say, I own this digital copy. You can own the hard drive it's on. You can pay for it. I could sell you like a PDF document and say, you own this,
Yeah.
right? But you wouldn't. I would still own the copyright. I would have to transfer the copyright to you, and then you would own the copyright. But you wouldn't. There's no way in which you
Mm-hmm.
own the digital object. This is what NFTs tried to do, right? And it was stupid, right? They didn't transfer the copyright. Most of the people who
Mm-hmm.
worked on NFTs didn't even understand how copyright worked in the basic sense. So, a lot of those digital
Yeah.
contracts didn't even like deal with copyright transfer. So, if I were to start a digital library, the main problem is I wouldn't own anything in it. I could only license.
Mm-hmm.
I could start a
Mm-hmm.
digital shadow library and I could steal everything that I wanted to, and I could illegally distribute it. But again, and that would be the only way I would really have any control over the
Yeah.
materials in my digital library is if I was pirating it. That's the only way
Well,
in which
can
people
I just
actually
really
maintain
quickly?
control over digital objects.
Well, I was just gonna
So
say really quickly. So going back to
there's
the
really no way in
like
which
before
people
the
can own.
internet,
Yeah.
before digital anything. So when a library bought a book from a publisher, so it's not, there is some similarity there because they could do some copying for the sake of preservation, but then if they then, like if a library then we're making copies and then giving those to other libraries, that might run afoul of the publisher, or no? Like back in the day. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it could. You can make libraries have a lot of carve outs for making, if a book is like, say a book gets it give a paperback, and usually
Mm-hmm.
what happens is the library will just buy a new copy if a book gets worn out. But
Mm-hmm.
technically you have the right to just make a copy of it. So if you wanted to,
Yeah.
scan it or type it out or whatever, they can do that under the law. But Library of Congress can't just
Yeah.
buy one
Yeah.
book, print off 15,000 and send it out to every
Yeah.
public library. No, that's
Yeah. Okay.
generally wouldn't be
So
allowed, I
in
would
some
think.
sense, so I guess, in some sense, I feel like having more control over the digital copies in the same, like even just within that realm of like what used to happen is one step forward. But then, do you feel like, based on how publishers are behaving, based on the ecosystem that is kind of developed, do you feel like there needs to be momentum behind like a larger push to just like have either libraries or some public or some more benevolent governance model to actually own that copyright, which is kind of, I think, where I'm headed. I don't know exactly how to get there or what that is, but like I feel like that copyright needs to be owned by somebody other than the publisher, and it's like causing all sorts of problems. But yeah, where do you sit with that? Like that deep ownership and control of the content. I mean, would it work if it was just the researchers that, or the universities owning it, or do you see problems with that also?
Yeah, I mean, copyright creates a lot of problems,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't really solve as many as people think. If you it's one of those things that's hard to visualize, and I think maybe someday I should just like make a chart or something. But if you thought about like the pure amount of things that get created, because everything as soon
Yeah.
as it's written in a fixed format has copyright. You don't have to register copyright to have it, so everything more or less is just copyrighted from the get-go. If you were to visualize how much intellectual property companies own compared to who people say copyright works for, which is like authors, the it would be the bar
Yeah.
chart would be, the same thing with like what's the top
Yeah.
1% of wealth. You wouldn't be able to put it on the same chart, and so you have all this huge amount of intellectual property that goes unused, and there's no
Yeah.
reason for it to be
Yeah.
copyrighted because it's never could be used by everyone, by that company. It never could be exploited for any kind of gain, although it's just accumulated, it's just sat there. And so the problem is people want to solve this problem by making regular working class authors and writers give up their copyright and say you should be okay with piracy. That's not any good either because those people need to get paid. They need to make a living. That doesn't do anything for them, and you're just picking an easier target. The target shouldn't be them. It should be, if you create code for Microsoft, why don't you own the code? Well, it's because you're an employee. The employer owns the copyright, right? Um, and any kind of copying, any kind of writing, anything, all this stuff is owned by companies. So one thing that was really helpful was controlled digital lending, which is a way of having a digital version of a physical borrowing scheme. So, in controlled digital lending, you would buy a physical book, you would scan and make a copy of it, and then you could not circulate that physical book. This is very important. You have to have an own to loan ratio. And then you could loan out one digital copy for every copy you had with DRM on it, so it couldn't be downloaded. So you could temporarily loan it out. It wouldn't be copied. Obviously, it would be read, and then that copy would either, DRM would close it off or whatever, however that would work. And so that maintains buying the physical books. Although you wouldn't even have to buy the physical books. You could buy, technically you could just keep the receipts and just say, well, we did purchase this book, therefore we have the right to loan it. So you could make
Okay.
all of these purchases and then loan those digital versions. And so instead of paying per checkout, you would
Okay. Can I
pay.
So
for
yeah,
copy that you could check out
super
at any
interesting, and
time.
I like thinking about that. I feel like part of my reaction though is that I almost want to like narrow the focus of this to solve this for like just take the scholars that aren't trying to make money off of their, like, this is not like books, like just like a researcher not only is not making money on their research outputs, they are paying to get their research outputs out there. So like what does this look like for people who are so
Okay.
far removed from monetizing their research outputs or their scholarship outputs, and like would be totally fucking fine if it didn't affect their career, to just have it be completely free and like CC0, just like I don't fucking care, like I'm just doing this to get published in this place so I can advance my career, like I'm getting money from grants. To me, like, I don't understand.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, I when you get into the details, obviously I understand, but like just from like playing dumb, like I don't understand like why we can't just have everything in the public domain. Like
Why it's
why
not all
can't
public
we
domain.
rally to fight for that, right? And then obviously like if you write a book, you're spending a bunch of time, like that's a little bit different. But like primary sources, like primary scholarship, I don't. And for people who the people that are creating the content have absolutely no expectation of any sort of monetization whatsoever. Like how are these companies setting it up so they're getting the copyright and making so
Hmm.
much fucking money off of them? Like, like this is the part that I can't. I don't know. I have trouble wrapping my head around. And obviously, when you get into the details, I understand it all. Like they've cornered, the prestige market and all this stuff. But like, I don't know.
Yeah.
How do you think about like that when you narrow it down to like the content creators, research articles where there's no business model for the content creators at all? Yes.
Yeah, and if you explain it to any
Yeah.
person, they will go, "Yeah,
Yeah.
why is it
Yeah.
like that?" You explain this to any person, they'll go,
Yeah.
"Yeah, that doesn't make sense. None of that makes sense. How did it end up like that?" Um, and in one way, it is one of the many ways in which the government subsidized private industry. It is, it allowed a lot of research infrastructure to be bought up in the 1950s and the post-war boom,
Hmm.
and allowed a lot of consolidation of scientific journals. And
Yeah.
it's the outsourcing and privatization of government functions. So a lot of that research was done in government labs. It was done in universities. It was published in journals that were run by people in
Hmm.
universities. And then eventually many of these things spun off into companies. And I was reading some J.D. Bernal, who was a scientist. I believe he's Irish, and he gosh, I don't remember what he's famous for, but he had a lot of thoughts about like reforming science and science education. I believe he had some stuff to do with physics and statistics. But anyway, um, he was talking about like all the difficulty of like, why do we have these journals? Why don't we have like access to
Yeah.
individual articles? And he was basically pre-imaging Web of Science, right, which was created in his lifetime. And he was like, this is an amazing thing, right? We need this. This is exactly what I was talking about. So it makes sense to have those sorts of, and of course, Web of Science has always been like a private company of indexing scientific research. The question, and so I really wouldn't mind if that kind of stuff just maintained separate and was whatever. But yeah, why do these journals have to be privately owned? Especially when public servants, public
Yeah.
researchers, their careers are built on getting accepted into these private journals. Why is it like that? And the answer is, again, the government has an ideological commitment to maintaining private businesses. That's at the end of the day, that's the answer as to why that system is like that. What I think we can do about it is play the long game,
Yeah.
because that's because
Hmm.
I don't want to play the short game because that's probably going to be too disruptive. I wouldn't want this to change overnight because that would probably fuck a lot of people over. But with many things, on many times there's a tipping point, and the way I've always conceptualized how could we actually reform scholarly publishing, and I've thought about it a lot over the years, is chipping away. Okay, we flip this journal to open access and we get it, it becomes diamond open access. It gets funded by a university department. and it runs that way, and people publish in it, and it has prestige. We flip this. We have archive.org for preprints, which is owned by like Cornell or whatever. We flip this, we flip that, and eventually the tide will start to turn to we've made all of this investment in library publishing and university publishing, in non-commercial publishing, that it breaks the monopoly or the duopoly of those large publishers. And so I think really what we should be focusing on is supporting
Mm-hmm.
open access, free to publish, free to read, and doing that with public money, because academics have this sort of, again,
Mm-hmm.
it's under attack, but they have this sort of free reign to
Yeah.
use money in certain ways that like a public library doesn't. And we can make investment decisions that are a little counterintuitive, but once they're done, would ultimately lead to a lot of, it would obviously be a lot cheaper. There wouldn't be a profit motive. Removing profit would be very good,
Mm-hmm.
except for the people who are, getting that profit, shareholders, that sort of thing. And again, that's why there's an ideological commitment against it, because do you want the stock market to go bad? Do you want your retirement money to
Yeah.
go away? So again, that's a problem. But again, this piece by piece thing, it's the same way I think about open educational resources. Is if there was a tipping point, and there has kind of been one already in a lot of universities, the survey courses and the early education
Mm-hmm.
courses have already
Uh-huh.
been like, why aren't we using OER? Why aren't we just
Yeah.
doing, we already have
Super.
taught this class for 20 years.
Yeah.
Why do we need to have a $120 textbook? Why don't we have a
Yeah.
free textbook and then charge students $15 for courseware that goes on top of it, that does the automatic grading? Why don't we do that? And so that tipping point is happening in OER, and in open access, it really, open access got really hijacked by publishers, and it's really unfortunate. Coalition S and Plan S have a lot of blame for this. The European research institutions have a lot of blame for this. They really fucked it up. And really allowed it to be co-opted, and really allowed, and I think we have to look for examples outside of the imperial core. We have to look at what is open access publishing looking like in Africa. What's it looking like in Latin America and the Caribbean? What's it looking like around the world? So if you look at like Red Alec and
that's a much better way of pronouncing it.
There's Red Alec and there's
I like Red Alec better. That's a South American.
Yeah. It's
yeah, they kind of are
network of it's a network of of Latin America and the Caribbean. So Red Alec.
Yeah, I think one problem that I've seen with some of the either the library publishing or institutional repositories, or the things that are you're trying to do this homegrown, or kind of having some of these people who are not necessarily as experienced at running products and services, and basically having more customer facing stuff, is what you were saying earlier, where you really have to commit to this being a product. And a lot of times products are only 10 to 20% of the technology that goes into it, and 80% all the other human shit. It's like you're saying, you need a community behind it. You need to hire somebody to do the community shit. And I made this mistake too, where I raised money for my startup, and I just was learning software development. So I was really excited about the software development, and we wasted a bunch of our money on the software development, and we were less successful then than we are now, where I'm basically just spending $100 a month on the ghettoest, most bootstrappy shit ever. And I'm just completely focused on who's publishing, or how do I get people to publish? And it's and so you really have to, that's where you need to make the investment is, okay, yeah, you need some sort of technology, you need some sort of product, but then really what the product is a community. A journal is a community of people that publish there to network, to advance their careers, to establish themselves in the community, to do all that shit. All that shit is human stuff. And it's there's a psychology game, there's a prestige game, it's all human shit. And I think the for-profit publishers know that, and they do crazy fucking shit to maintain their control over that, because they've survived preprints, they've survived all sorts of stuff. The only time when they get fucked is when they piss off an entire community, and like you're saying, they get flipped, right? The whole community is like, fuck you, we're going over and starting our own journal, and that's the only time that you can successfully take things away from them. So I do agree with that assessment. I would hope that people make sure that they're making a full investment in making that journal a success, right? So like there's things like, and there's just certain things that just I don't quite understand. So
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and it makes sense, like an institutional repository, like they're getting money to serve like their local people, but in some ways it doesn't make sense for like going from there to a journal, because like if you're a geneticist, like your community is not like at UCLA. Your community is a global network of geneticists, and that's something that's a pet peeve of mine, and it's
Yeah,
been
yeah.
very frustrating. Like, why are you making services for just UCLA? And I understand like your budget is coming from UCLA or the UC, but like that's just not how science works. Like, you are cutting yourself off at the knees by not investing in global infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I do think that happens more than I'm being a little bit unfair, but yeah. So there's certain like problems here with just like having that like product mindset that limits things a bit.
Yeah, and I mean that's definitely you kind of have to, when you're a public servant and you actually believe in what you say, that you actually exist for public benefit, you still have to talk out of
Yeah,
both sides of your mouth a
yeah.
little bit and say, well, this is good for the university for X, Y, and Z. And that's kind of why people are always like, what's the point of institutional repositories? And they're correct. They are kind of stupid, but it allows me to say,
Mm-hmm.
we are look how many downloads this is getting, look how much traction this is getting because we're making this open access.
Yeah.
Now my end game is I'm just a communist and I want information to be free, right? But I'm telling them this is good for the university, this saves our students money, this increases our prestige, this is genuine. You can say the moral stuff like it is good for this research to be open because you'll get cited all around the world, and people who will be able to cite your research who would never be able to afford it before,
Mm-hmm.
independent scholars who don't have access to university collections. So you do have that part. You have to pitch it that way, and you have to be good at selling that. And again, that's kind of what the institutional repository is. It's just a tool for me to then increase the amount of research in the world that's open access. If I could do it
Yeah.
for
Well,
20
that's
universities
where
and just have
I get
one
really excited about
institutional
the concept of
repository, I
like
would,
networked
but I can't.
repositories and like some of the work that Core is doing, where once you start networking them together, now it actually becomes a decentralized infrastructure for a global system. That to me is like, I'm really excited about that. I just don't know like how things are going in that direction, or I don't know if people are. Yeah. Okay, cool. What can you talk a little bit about that? Because I feel
Oh,
like
it already
I
exists
have
and
a
it
little
works
bit of
pretty
a
well.
blind spot there in terms of like the tooling and technology around that.
Yeah, so one of the major tools for that, you mentioned Core. There are lots of places that, because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
repositories work on OAI PMH,
Mm-hmm.
they can push out their metadata, and so that's a protocol for exchanging information. And then one place, which is now called Our Research, it doesn't roll off the tongue, but it was on paywall. And what they started doing was then indexing all of these things. And then whenever you come onto the page, say I go onto a Springer Nature and I go to the page and I don't have access, if I have the unpaywall browser plugin, a little green light will show up on the right side, and I click it and it takes me to it. That underlying index now is the basis for finding things open access in library catalogs, in Web of Science, in Open Alex. So that infrastructure is, and since most stuff, even if it's published by article processing charges, um, you will get to the open access version. So if I put a version in my repository, make it open access, and it's because it's closed access somewhere
Nice.
else, Web of
Yeah,
Science is going to start routing people to it.
I didn't know that.
This big commercial product is going to do
Yeah,
that,
they've been doing
and
that for a while.
Google Scholar is going to do it. Google
Mm-hmm.
Scholar has been great about putting repository versions. Yeah, Google Scholars, people don't believe us when
Mm-hmm.
we say, Skullcom people have been saying this for years, Google Scholar is not
Yeah.
robust. It is not sustainable. It could fall over
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
tomorrow.
say. Like, there was like like
it
no
is
like
it is like three
like
guys in a
that is
trench coat.
incredibly small for that group,
And
right?
yeah, and it's all, the way they do
Mm,
things is secret. It's not open. It's not reproducible. Uh,
mm.
they make tools, but the tools aren't usually all that
Well, can
stable.
I
It
ask
just
you
kind of
something?
works, and it
Can
works
I
for
ask you
what it
something that's a
does.
little, maybe a little bit
It works
pointed?
pretty well at finding
Why did
stuff.
something like
Yeah,
Google Scholar come from a private company and not from the library community?
because it had proprietary
You know,
access to
like through web
information
crawling.
from the companies. So no, the companies have agreements with Google Scholar
Mm.
to surface their metadata in Google Scholar, and that's why that's kind of stuff is open. Is not
Got
open
it.
and it's
Okay,
not
so
sustainable
they can
because we don't
use,
know how to reproduce what
because
Google
they're
Scholar
embedded
does.
in a larger company, they can leverage that to basically unlock doors that are not open to libraries. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, that's essentially the secret to, as I understand it, how Google
Yeah.
Scholar got started is
Yeah. Yeah.
commercial
Okay, that's a
connections
good
that
point.
libraries just simply don't have access to. Um, it's also kind of like Google was started in a library. I mean, like it did start in libraries, but the stuff gets spun off and commercialized. If you want to see a version of Google Scholar that is being run by
Yeah. Yeah.
people who are librarians, look at Open Alex. That
Yeah,
took
but
the
even Open
Microsoft
Alex, it's
academic
like
graph
it
and
took a
is
while for
building on
them
it and
to get
making it
funding,
work.
right? Like
Librarians would do this
that
if we
in
could.
my mind, in some sense, that didn't come from like deep in the library community. That came from like entrepreneurs or people that were like having to exist and pursuing that outside of like the UCLA library budget didn't support that. Like there was no library budget that supported them. They got, they basically did it. They pulled that out of their heart, blood, sweat, and tears, and then they got, funding from Arcadia. But I, that's the kind of thing where it's like,
Yeah,
this is where I just like I have this like weird like cognitive dissonance. It's like, and again, I'm not in the library community, so maybe this is why I'm like stepping on toes and offending people. But like when I look at Open Alex, like that looks, feels, and smells like a library to me.
yeah,
It's like I need information. This is like a very like very well organized UX to go and get that information. And again, it's maybe more for like research articles and stuff. It's not like all the it's not all the collections and content and stuff. But like to me, that like feels like a library, and I see these things coming from other places, like not things that like the UCLA library is doing, or not like I don't know, and like PubMed Central feels like a library to me, and that's from the government, that's the state. But I don't understand why everybody's not just dropping everything and like investing in Open Alex or doing things like that. And I don't know, maybe you could help me kind of frame this in a different way, because I think there's definitely some ignorance on my part. I'm getting a few things wrong here, but do you have the same sense, or
yeah.
is there some part of what I just said that's correct?
No, you are correct because libraries. I think there's a couple reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One reason would be the centralization of campus IT. So developers and IT professionals are being taken out of the libraries and put into centralized IT. So we have less um, capacity for doing programming and development. So a lot of university libraries simply don't have the talent to create new tools. Um, so like, yeah, why doesn't a university just create something like Open Alex or create these open source tools and share them out?
I really don't.
That's a good
Yeah.
question because I really don't understand that. Um, especially like especially at universities. I think this is changing in some ways. There are open source program offices, OSPOs, and a lot of times libraries are involved with them. So that's to promote open source uh, product development and program development within a university by bringing people together. So a part of the problem is siloing and bureaucracy. Part of it is technology and technology commercialization. So as soon as you come up with a cool idea, they're going to say, "Why don't you commercialize it? Make it a product." That co-ops a lot of cool stuff right off the bat. There's another aspect, kind of the other side of this, which is there is a lot of librarian
Mm,
input into these things, but you don't see it
yeah.
because it's all unpaid. So the people who are product testing these things, the people, you know, vendors who you pay money to will come to you and say, "Hey, would you tell us how to build our product?" And like this is like a good deal for you. And I'm like, "Hey, do you want to pay me?"
Yeah.
I've straight up told them, I'm like, "I don't do development work for free. I don't know what you're asking me." But there
Yeah.
is a reserve army of thousands of librarians who are product testing, who are alpha testing, beta testing.
Okay, that's a
That's why
great,
this
yeah.
stuff looks and feels
Yeah,
like a
that's
library,
true.
because librarians are building it. Um, yeah, I mean, Ex Libris was like, "Hey, you know, if you get early on, you'll help us shape the product." I'm like, "Oh boy,
Yeah.
do I get your salary?" Um, you know, I've told
Yeah.
people, I've been in meetings several times where I said I don't work for free, and I just
Yeah.
have to say it
Yeah.
because people don't. It doesn't get through their fucking head. Where people will just say, "Hey, would you work?" You know, I helped alpha test. Like my university, the first one I worked for, the first one I had my librarian job at,
Mhm.
they alpha and beta tested World Share Management Service from OCLC.
Mhm.
I've alpha tested so many
Yeah.
things in the past 6 years. Bpress exhibits. So Bpress has institutional repository. They have an exhibit tool they were building. We we helped build it. We helped
Mm.
build so many things. I had to point out to them things that were inaccessible, things that didn't work. I mean, I think between me and my coworker, we probably did most of the alpha testing for that product. I know for a fact that me and my coworker did all of the development for ProQuest's
Yeah.
ingestion tools to Bpress. They worked with us, and we did it, you
Yeah.
know, because we needed it for Bpress, and we
Yeah.
worked directly with their product developer. We did that. So that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons is a lot of this
Yeah.
librarian labor is getting eaten up and commercialized, and it's invisible, and that's a problem
Yeah.
of librarian work. Is if it works well, people don't think you're doing it. um, one one thing, one project I was working on, so I was telling you how we do this outreach. We get these alerts, so we have Google Scholar alerts, Scopus alerts, Web of Science alerts for the university name. I thought, why don't we just take the OpenAlex API, pull all of that into a big spreadsheet, and then use the Sherpa Romeo API, pull all of that into a spreadsheet, cross match that data. Why don't we do that? And it will say, okay, this is not open access, because OpenAlex will tell us if it's open access or not. If it's not open access, pull in Sherpa Romeo data. That will tell us if it uh, what version can be put in a repository, what's the embargo, and then we will have the program run a script and give us the template email and say, "Dear Professor so and so, your paper such and such has a 6-month embargo if you give us this version," and then automatically send the
Yeah,
email. And
that's
the idea
awesome.
was, this was called the Lean Green Open Access Machine, and I've been working on it, and I had some funding to do it, to work with someone, but it didn't really come through in
Yeah.
time. And then of course the dean left, and of course he was the one who promised the money. And so I've been testing this. I have it. I
Yeah.
passed it along to my coworkers, but I still have it. I'm not very good at Python, and so I can't
Yeah,
fix
I
it
was gonna say
myself.
you could probably use some of the
I did a
LLM
lot of
stuff
it with
with some of the
DeepSeek,
engines, rough engines.
and
Yeah.
yeah, it's good enough to test the idea. It's good enough to like run it.
Mm.
But yeah, like it really didn't understand the Sherpa Romeo API, and so I
Yeah.
kind of got stuck there. And
Yeah. Yeah.
by that
Yeah.
point, the code had gotten so long that I was like, okay, where is it broken?
But I love the
So I
green
kind
library
of would
stuff
have to start
because
from the
of all of
beginning.
the copyright stuff.
So
Like, I just love like,
yeah,
yeah, like it's this idea of like, okay, what, like, let's create like just like some sort of basement, like just like some safety net, right? Right, you know, and I think, and it kind of gets to your point of like, how do you meet researchers where they are? And so like, I actually really like that idea
yeah,
of like automating that process of like all the way to like a researcher could respond to an email, like especially if it was like, you know, and especially honestly, even if you could time it up with like as things are just coming out, like if you do that for articles that are like just published and it's like fresh in their mind, they still have the AAM somewhere like locally, like I, yeah, I
hmm
love that. I really love that idea because I do think
that's why we have to do it
researchers
fast. Yeah,
are fundamentally opposed to the way that the system is being run. It's just they're busy. You know, they're tied up with this. Like they have to publish here to advance their career. So yeah, just like focusing on how to make it as easy as humanly possible to to create this copyright safety net where it's like, and the AAMs are great because they're basically pretty fucking close to the version of record, and then
Yep.
just like they have all you have the copyright.
Mhm.
Yeah,
There are studies on this. Yeah, there are studies on the difference between AAMs because there's so many that are self-archived. You can actually study the difference between
yeah.
AAMs and
And
versions
what's
of
actually
record,
would be a nice,
and there's very
and you know,
little
it would be a nice
difference.
little twist.
Like
So
statistically not
publishers do
significant.
this obnoxious thing where they sometimes deliberately ask you to put the AAM into a format that is harder to read, so that they can basically like have this value out of, oh, we made it look pretty, whatever. But with some of the generative AI stuff, like they're pretty good at like they hallucinate. But if you give them a thing and say like reformat this or rejigger this, you could like add a step on that automation where you actually like spiff it up and like have the AI kind of help you create something that looks a lot more polished than the AAM. So yeah, and it's just a little sad.
Oh yeah. Yeah, if the
Yeah,
yeah, because if it's a digital file, you wouldn't have to
yeah,
OCR it. Although it might already be a PDF, so you
mm,
might have to OCR it.
yeah,
OCR is always a tricky thing. But yeah, why
yeah.
not? Why not have it just scan it and
Okay, well,
reformat it and make it pretty?
yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I mean, it costs money. I mean,
yeah,
computer
yeah.
processing would cost money,
Um,
but
okay, so I do
yeah,
have
why not?
4 o'clock, so we do need to wrap up in a little bit here. But yeah, what again? Now drifting kind of all the way up into the clouds. Like, kind of, what are you the most excited about? What are you the most worried about? Where do you feel like people should be kind of really thinking about in terms of like kind of for letting our mind drift to the next 10, 20 years? What's your kind of north star right now?
Hmm. I really think people should focus on building capacity. I think they really should focus on um, real nose to the grindstone. Because you asked like why are institutional repositories, why are they local? But I think that local focus is also important. Supporting the journals through a university, flipping journals, finding support structures, figuring out these business models, figuring out these workflows. When you invite a journal to flip, saying, here's how we're going to support you, here's where the money will come from, here's where the staff will come from. Have
Mm-hmm.
a plan in place, start bothering people to get you the money, because that's the day-to-day work that is really, it takes a long time to see it. You have to be in a position 3 or 4 years
Mm-hmm.
before you start seeing the fruits of your labor sort of pay off.
Yeah.
uh, but that's not a long period of time either. So if you really are building a strong service, the thing is you really have to have
Yeah.
buy-in from your administrators, which is a crapshoot.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I can't blame anyone for not being able to do this. There's tons of people I know who want to do this, but I'm saying, you know, talk out of both sides of your mouth. Make the point that this is good for the university. Find any argument that will work. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
um, you don't always have to tell the truth at work. Okay, you can tell people what they want to hear. Uh, find a way to, you have your goals, they have theirs.
Yeah.
Try and meet in the middle.
Yeah.
That's compromise. You don't have to change their mind. You just have to get what you want. And so build your capacity, build services, capture those statistics, show off like, hey, this is working. Give us more money to work better. Um, and hopefully, again, the more people can do this, the more people we can point to and say, they did it. Hey, they did it. Hey, they did it. That's easy. Why don't we do it? We've already got a model. Again, it's the same Google Scholar problem. We don't know how they built Google Scholar, but librarians will tell you how they built. And I think this is
Mm-hmm.
another thing where you're saying, like, why aren't libraries building
Mm-hmm.
these softwares? It's because we're busy building workflows. We're always telling each other how
Mm-hmm.
we did something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, how did you organize the department? What people did you hire? We're spending all of our time thinking about that
Yeah.
stuff. And so we don't really have time to do a startup style sort of thing. We're telling each other, hey, we got collection development to work with scholarly
Yeah.
communications to work with special
Yeah.
collections to do this cool thing. And that's what we're telling each other about. And so, we do that. And I think you're right. We do have we don't dream high enough. And that's what I'm kind of pointing for here is pick a goal and really push for it. And if you can't get it, there's always other things you can work on. There's always more work to be done. But really showing off what you're able to do on that local level, it really matters. I mean, as much as I would love to do national policy stuff, I know that the moment I did get a job like that, if I got a job at like Spark or something and got to talk about open access to all of North America, I know I
Yeah.
would almost immediately become disconnected from the
Yeah.
kind of work day to day that I
Yeah.
need to know about in order to make effective policy. So there's always going to be that distinction of the person who's
Yeah.
doing the
Yeah.
coolest
There's a
thing
really good
is probably not someone I'm going to be
kind of
hearing
phrase for
from.
activists where you want to think global but act local. That's like the most effective like movements, grassroots movements start with that. You want to like know the goal stuff, but you have to actually get off your chair and do the local shit. That's the actual meat of the process of affecting change. It's okay. I'll say the cheesy phrase.
Yeah, I almost said that earlier. The way I thought about the institutional repository. Yeah, well, though I was thinking about the institutional repository. It was think locally, fuck globally, which is we're going to get our local scholars, we're going to get their stuff open access, and then we're going to push
Mm-hmm.
it out to the world, and we're going to show off how many downloads they're getting, how many citations they're getting, how many collaborations they're getting, and that is
Yeah.
what we're going to do to prove the value of making things open access. So that was how I always described it, but I didn't always
I
say
love
that in
it.
work
Think
meetings because then I
think
would get
locally, fuck globally. I
yelled
got
at about it 2 years later.
it. All right,
I
Justin. Well,
think
this
that's a
was super
Gogol
fun.
Bordello lyric.
Thanks for the whole conversation. That was great. You've given me some homework and some things to think about. Um, yeah, I think we can call it there.
All
Yeah,
right,
this was great.
I'll turn off the
So
recording. Thanks so
yeah.
much for having me on. All right, hang on 1 second. So I